We are going to begin the recording now. Perfect. And recording has started. So welcome everyone. Thank you for coming this evening for the second installment of Goulbourn Museum Speaker Series. My name is Jessica Parsons. I'm the Programming Officer at the museum, and I'm so happy to be here to introduce tonight's talk, Gardening with Native Plants with Mélanie Ouellette. I am online tonight with my colleagues Miriam Temper, the program coordinator at the museum, who's been spearheading the first year of our Growing Goulbourn Garden project, and our program assistant, Georgian Parks. Georgian will be helping with the technical behind the scenes work, just to make sure that tonight's event runs smoothly. So before we begin, I'd like to start by acknowledging the land that I'm speaking to you from tonight, and which the Goulbourn Museum occupies. The museum recognizes that the city of Ottawa is located on unceded territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe Nation. We extend our respect to all First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples for their valuable past and present contributions to this land. We also recognize and respect the cultural diversity that First Nations, Inuit, and Métis people bring to the city of Ottawa. So to start, we'll quickly go over how this evening's event is going to run. First, we will hear all about gardening with native plants from Mélanie. During the presentation, we just ask everyone to keep their microphones on mute so that we can all hear the presentation clearly. Afterwards and throughout the presentation, we will engage in a question and answer period where you may ask Mélanie a question by raising your hand using the Zoom reactions feature at the bottom of your screens and then unmuting yourself. We may also ask questions throughout the presentation using the chat function. Miriam, Georgian, and I will be monitoring the chat throughout the presentation, so please feel free to type any questions there and we will attend to them as we're going or at the end. So I will now pass it on to Miriam to introduce tonight's presenter.
Hello, so tonight we will be hearing from Mélanie Ouellette. Mélanie is the founder and president of the Ottawa Wildflower Seed Library, which has been operating since October 2020. To create and operate the Seed Library, she draws from over a decade of experience in policy, programming, communications, and project management in the federal government and not-for-profit sector. She has a master's degree in political science from Laval University, where she studied Canada's agricultural policy in international trade negotiations, and an MBA from the University of Ottawa. Her paying job is Manager for Strategic and Operational Planning and Engineers Canada, where she is responsible for strategic and operational planning and reporting, risk management, and national consultations. Welcome, Mélanie. I turn it over to you.
Thank you very much for the nice introduction. I'm really happy to be here and have the chance to speak with you. I think you guys are fantastic and a bunch of troopers, because for me, attending a webinar after work, that's a lot to ask for. So I'm really grateful to see you today. Unfortunately, as I'm presenting, I'm sharing with you my screen, I can't see your face or when you're raising your hand. And so feel free, throughout the presentation, to raise your hand or put a question, as they said, in the chat function. I would really like for this to be more of a discussion rather than just me, talking for the whole presentation. I find we all learn more from each other when we have great interactions. And so, and I think the number of us enable us to have that kind of format today. Before I start, I would like to know, if you want to share, you don't need to share if you don't want to, but I would like to share why you wanted to attend the presentation today and what you hope to get from it, if you want, if you feel comfortable. Does anyone want to say something?
I'll go ahead. I think this is going to be a really interesting presentation for me, just because I don't know much about native flowers. And I feel like that's a problem. I feel like I know a lot more about other species and not the ones that I should know about.
Thank you. I just want to let you know I'm taking notes right now, so to make sure that I hit all the points that you're looking for by the end of the presentation. So anyone else wants to say something?
Jane,
I will. Oh,
go ahead, Jane.
Okay. Mélanie, I've
Yes.
been following you on the Facebook, and I went and helped to sow seeds last fall.
Yes,
with your group. Yes, that was wonderful. And I did sow seeds this last fall, and those seeds, many of them have germinated, and now, you know, it's just the last week that I've been trying to figure out how to handle them. But there is I mean, I've been trying to learn this stuff for the last year and a half, and there's so much more to learn. So I'm every time you talk or anybody talks about this, I'm ready to listen.
Oh, that's so nice of you. Thank you.
My name is Catherine Ann, and I'm out in the Hamilton area.
Oh,
But
nice.
I'm here to broaden my knowledge of wildflowers.
Okay.
I've bought a property that has a significant portion of ravine, and I'm trying to nativize it.
Okay, nice.
So I've ripped out the periwinkle, the English ivy, the garlic mustard, and have put in 150 native plants at this point.
That's good.
Have another 40 to go, but looking to get more information on what I can do to diversify the flowers.
Oh, that's good. Okay, so maybe I'm not like, this is more like a general like presentation, but after like you're gonna see my coordinates, so feel free to like contact me after, and I can give you more specific advice if you have specific questions on some plants.
Terrific, thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'm newer to the native gardening and native
okay, that's
wildflowers,
good.
so it's new to me.
Okay,
Thank
that's good. Thank you for trying. That's good. Welcome to the club. Might become an addiction though, just a heads up. Anyone else?
Yeah, there's also some contributions in the chat. Brendan has said, hello, everyone. I'm excited to learn more about the seed library in general and get some tips for my own garden. And Madian has said, always excited for new gardening tips.
Okay, that's good. Well, thank you. So if we don't have any more comments or so I wrote down everything that you said, so hopefully I covered that. Should be achievable. If not, as I've said, like at the end of the presentation, you're gonna find my coordinates, and you can also find us on the web, and my coordinates are also there. So if I don't answer all your questions, like feel free to drop me a message, and I'm always happy to help or point you in the right direction. So as we said, like my name is Mélanie Ouellette, and I founded the Ottawa Wildflower Seed Library in October 2020. And so what is the seed library? So, you know, when I founded this, like there's two approaches I could have taken. I could have said, okay, so the point of this movement is just to give seeds so then people plant native seeds. But I really wanted to establish a library. Why a library and not just like a seed exchange or a seed giveaway as usually, you know, like there's a bunch of models that follow that like elsewhere across the province. And the idea is to like build a relationship with your fellow community gardeners, and also build an increased relationship with nature. And so the idea is that your community invests in you and gives you free seeds or free plants. And then in return, once your flowers have bloomed, we ask you to give back your seeds. And so we take back your seeds and we donate them to others. So the idea is to build like a reciprocity, build a community. And then what's also interesting about this approach is that, you know, we've given like 115 different species last fall. And so there's no, like, contrary to like the typical seeds that you would buy at the store that comes in like a nice package with clear instructions, native plant species are all different. And so it really requires you to build a relationship also with your plant to be able to collect the seeds and sow them and so forth. And so I would describe the notion of the library more in terms of relationship building than just providing seeds. And so, as I've said, like, you know, like we give it for free. There's no membership fee. And when we have events or when we have plant sharing events, like people can take as many plants and as many seeds as they wish and they can use. And so people are often overwhelmed by how much generosity their community is investing in them, and are very grateful for that kind of interaction. And so that's kind of the intent behind it. And so it's not only for individuals, but we also have provided plants and seeds for community or school projects, for example. Okay, so So we've been operating for 2 years. I had been looking for like a project to invest in for a long time. I couldn't find anything that matched my values and belief system and what I wanted to contribute. And so that's kind of how I decided to start this. And so the beginning was when we started, it was during COVID. And so some kind people invested in this project and gave me some free seeds. And then in return, I mailed a bunch of them. And so we mailed like 800 seed envelopes in the first year. And we estimate that, there's probably between 3 to 5, a minimum of 3 to 5 plants per envelope. And as Jane can attest, there's more than that usually. But at minimum, we think like in the first year, there's 4,000 new native plants that were like resulted in the region of Ottawa. And then this year, it became a little bit bigger as people are learning more and more about our work. And so what we did because of COVID again is we had smaller events across the city, and we also mailed seeds like we did. And so this year we gave 100 different kinds of species, and then we estimate that it resulted in at least 22,500 new native plants. And so that's only the first year. As you can imagine, like each plant gives like, hundreds, thousands of seeds and feeds like birds and insects and so forth. So that's a really conservative estimate of the ecological impact of such a simple project. And so the first question that I often get is, what are native plants? Like, what's the word native? So this is the definition that we use. So indigenous terrestrial and aquatic species that have evolved in a particular region, ecosystem, and habitat. So typically that's recognized as before European settlement. And so those are plants that have been, on this continent for a long, long, long time. For the seed library, we only accept what we call straight species, and I'll come back to that later when I'm going to explain to you what a straight species is. And native plants from Ontario and Quebec, which you can confirm in what we call the VASCAN, which is the database of vascular plants of Canada. So that's a peer-review science database that will tell you, if a plant is from a certain province or not. Like I encourage all of you to download like one of the many plant ID app available, because once you're going to start ID plants around you, you're going to be blown away how many species are in the wild that are not native, that are introduced species in our area. And so what we ask people to do is, when you are looking at native plants or thinking about donating plants on your big piece of land, for example, you really need to make sure you identify it properly, because not all the plants we see in the wild are native. So why should we care about native plants? So, there's a lot of buzz happening right now around native plants. It's becoming a little bit more trendy, which is great. But why do people care so much? And so native plants have evolved over thousands of years with our local species of butterflies, bees, and insects. And some are even codependent. And so, for example, think about it in terms of evolution. Like, you want to compete, you want to make sure you survive. What do? You kind of specialize in certain niche. And then when there's no one else in that niche, that means you don't have competition. And then you can thrive in that specific niche. And so, for example, there are flowers that have, evolved to be exactly the length of a hummingbird's beak. And so that means that to be like pollinated, that plant needs like either like a long tongue bee or like a hummingbird's beak to be able to get at the bottom of it. And so that means that, or for example, like there are some plants that only reproduce and put their eggs on specific types of plants, like a goldenrod, for example. So that means if that goldenrod disappears, that means that that species disappears also. And so, for example, and the classic example, and we have a picture here of a monarch that's laying her eggs on my swamp milkweed at my house. So the monarchs have evolved to be able to digest the toxicity of the milkweed. And their orange color is really to tell predators, hey, don't eat me because I'm toxic. And because it's grown to eat the toxic leaf, and it's kind of specialized in that area. But what that means is now it depends on milkweed to be able to feed its eggs and caterpillars mostly. And so that means that if there's no milkweed, then there's no monarch butterflies. And so these are kind of the codependencies we find in the wild. So that means if we choose non-native plants, we are depriving some of those species to be able to feed off plants that they've been codependent on for who knows how long. And so what's been happening also is with, you know, the rise of the different horticultural products that we have available, is that we have imported some, you know, like plants that our ancestors might have liked from Europe, or even plants that we find pretty from Asia. But what happens is that these plants, and some of them we've even modified to get, you know, longer blooms, for example, shorter, so then they look nicer in our yard, different colors. And so all of those different modifications have been introduced in our environment way too fast for our local, you know, butterflies, bees, and insects to be able to adapt, because the adaptation takes a very, very long time, as we know. And so it's kind of coming at different angles for them. And so, and some, you know, non-native plants, you know, have successfully outcompeted some of the native plants. Because they're not in check, you know, like if you are a goldenrod here, there's something that's going to eat you. But if you're goutweed, for example, you know, because nobody has grown to be able to eat you or feed off you, then you're able to grow and grow and grow forever. And that is how like plants become invasive and kind of outcompetes also sometimes our native plants. And so those are like the more ecological reasons to choose native plants. But also, like, another great thing about native plants is that, you know, if you choose the right plants for your conditions you have in your garden, for example, like if you have very dry, sunny spot, if you choose a plant that thrives in that kind of condition, that means you're not going to have to water them or amend the soil or use fertilizers, because those plants are used to grow in our climate without our intervention. And so that's also another benefit of using native plants. It doesn't mean you don't have any responsibilities in your garden, but it means at least you're not going to have to amend the soil and fertilize it and water after the plant has been established. So you can ask your questions again, like if you have any questions, or else I'm going to keep going.
There's actually a question in the
Oh,
chat
yeah, go
I might
ahead,
ask you. So
Yeah.
Catherine was just wondering if you know of a Canadian or North American based plant app so that the invasive versus native status are more accurate.
Yeah, so there's actually like one that's called oh yeah, I can EduMap, I think, EduMapp, I think.
EduMap, yeah, it's Canadian based, and it basically goes through and it lists all the invasive species. And if you take a photograph, you can see whether it's invasive, whether it's on the invasive list.
Yeah. Is that okay? Does that answer the question? And that app is also used by scientists to identify the location of invasive species. So you're also contributing to science when you're using it.
Super cool. Catherine said thanks.
Okay, good. Thank you, Miriam, also. So any other questions? Okay, I'm gonna keep going. And so another thing I wanted to bring forward is one of the buzzwords we hear also a lot is like pollinator garden, pollinator garden, pollinator garden. And I want to say like pollinator gardens are amazing and we love them, but it's important also to keep in mind like the full cycle of a butterfly. So when we're talking about a butterfly, we're just talking about the adult form of that species. Okay, so if we look at the little drawing we have here, we can see the 4 stages of a butterfly. So, you know, it starts as an egg, then becomes like a caterpillar, then it becomes a chrysalis, and then it becomes a butterfly. And as I've said, some of the plants have specific species of grasses, trees, or flowers that they need to be a host plant, which is like a plant that they're dependent on to eat at the caterpillar stage. And so when you're talking about a pollinated garden, specifically for butterfly, we're looking into plants that, yes, that bloom, but if we're just attracting butterflies, we're not supporting the full life cycle of butterflies. So as I've given the example of a monarch butterflies, that's dependent on milkweed, but there's like a whole variety of plants that that the different butterfly species rely on. And so I encourage you also, so when you decide to take on native plant gardening, not just look at the different types of bloom a plant have, but also look like, does the species support the full life cycle of a butterfly, for example, or maybe it's a beetle, and so forth. But think about it more not just in terms of bloom, but for the whole different life cycle of the insect or that you wish to support. I mentioned like before also the word cultivar, saying that the seed library does not accept cultivar. And I think that's really important for people to be able to know the distinction between a cultivar and a straight species, because, you know, like when we are kind of invaded by those kinds of species that are available, especially at larger stores. So a cultivar actually means cultivated variety. So cultivar is like a short term for those like 2 different terms. And so that basically means that it's a plant that's been changed to represent different characteristics that might not necessarily be like that, like if the plant was just left without human intervention. So typically it can be propagated by cuttings or division, and it's often the genetics clone of the parent plant. And you can tell the difference between a cultivated variety and a straight species sometimes by looking at the Latin name followed by like an English name at the end. I'll show you on the next slide what it looks like. And so it's important also, so the reason why the seed library does not accept cultivars is for many reasons. So one of them is to preserve the genetics, diversity and integrity of the seed collection, because we don't want to have like seeds that have like different, you know, genetics code in it. Like we want to make sure we keep it, because people sometimes will also like spread the seeds in the wild. And so we want to make sure that, you know, the seeds that we're using in the wild are good. There's also the idea that how do I say this? So the genetic, yeah, what was this name? The genetics variety. Yeah, I'm gonna keep going. It's gonna come back to me. Yes, that's what I want to say. And so what happens also is that the cultivated variety, there's not a lot of research that's been done on every different variation of the species that happen. Like we know in general, like some might produce a little bit more pollen, for example. Some might not produce pollen at all. You know, some of them that might be like purple are not eaten by insects versus green ones. And so, but the idea is that there's no one size fits all for dealing with cultivars. And the science doesn't really tell us much about what is the ecological impact when it comes to using cultivars. And so like, we don't tell people what to grow in the garden because, you know, we're not the seed police, but we are saying like, we don't want to receive any of your cultivars, please, because as I mentioned, we want to make sure we keep the genetics, integrity and diversity of the seed library. And so if you go to a store, this is kind of how you can try to identify what's a cultivar. So I got caught also. So this is like something that I had in my garden that I got rid of. And so if you look at Phlox on your left-hand side, where the tag is, so usually the Latin name is the first thing you see. And then what the cultivated variety is in like quotation marks. And so that is kind of like how so it's kind of like the trademark of the company, like Scarlet Flame belongs to that company, and it tells you what kind of variety it is and for what reason it was cultivated. So in this case, it was to have like a nice pink color, because if you look at the native plant that is the straight species in the wild, and you can see that actually it's a light purple. And so it's just, if you are thinking about giving plants or seeds to the seed library, these are the things that it's good to keep in mind. And so also, like, one of the things that, like, we want to make sure is that, yeah, people get excited about native plants, but we don't want to encourage people to just go and start harvesting like in the wild. And, like, if you do it, as one person, you might think, oh, it's not going to have a big impact. But if each and every one of us, we're like 1,700, almost 1,800 just on Facebook and 600 on our Instagram. And so if all of us just went in the green belt and started harvesting plants, like, that's it. Like, we would be depleting our beautiful environment, which we're trying to restore. And so what we're asking of people is to please just donate seeds from your own garden or plants from your own garden. But if you do collect in the wild, because some of the species might not necessarily be available, like, we ask you to have permission from the owner. That goes without saying. Collect the seeds, never collect plants. Unless, like a developer give you permission to go and harvest plants before they build houses, that's fine. But one of the reasons for that also is because a lot of invasive species like thrive in disturbed soil. And so if you take out like a native plant, maybe an invasive plant will establish itself and then will spread everywhere. And so we ask people just to collect seeds in the wild, not plants. Never take from the first one you see, because you never know if you're going to come across other plants of the same species, and maybe you're depleting the only plant that has that kind of that from that species in that area. And so never take from the first bunch you see. And then we ask you to collect not more than 10% from various plants, not take from one plant, just to make sure, again, that we preserve the genetic diversity. So if you want to, so after you've heard all of that and you still want to donate your seeds to the seed library, we ask you to make sure, as I've said, that it's a native, and you can check in Vascaine, as I mentioned, only donate straight species, as we've said. We ask you to make sure also, like, some people ask me like, okay, so I have like cultivars of black-eyed Susans, and then I have native black-eyed Susans. Do you still want my native black-eyed Susan seeds? And we ask you to not donate them, because we don't want to cross like, the genetics with the cultivars when it's possible, recognizing that we can't know like everywhere, like who's growing what, but, just be aware of that. And then make sure that your plants or your seeds came from a trusted nursery. And a trusted nursery is a nursery that discloses where the seeds come from and that they've been ethically harvested. And ethically harvested is really important because, like, there's been report of example of wild ginger. Like, we have wild ginger in Ontario. And some companies decided to make money out of it, or individuals, and like the species almost, went extinct. And so we need to make sure that the people that are actually selling those plants are not just going like, in the wild, taking out plants and selling it to us. Like, we want people that are also ethical. So again, so we don't deplete our environment. And if you're never sure, I'm not sure where my seeds are coming from, we ask you not to donate. It's really nice that people want to contribute, but like you heard of our statistics of this year, like we give seeds to hundreds of people and we receive donations from maybe like 12 big donors. And so some people feel guilty that they are not able to contribute. Don't worry about it. Like, like the nature is very generous and will always like give us what we need. And so don't worry if from the beginning you take from the seed library for the first few years. That's normal and that's expected. We expect that there's supposed to be like a time where we're just going to give to you without anything in return, but we trust that you will when you can. So let's say like you heard me talking, like, oh my God, okay, so now I want to do something, but I don't know where to start. And so the first, if you have limited time and energy, the first thing is to do, like the lady said, I didn't get your name, but you know, she said that she got like this piece of land and she removed the invasive species. Great job. Like the first thing to do is remove invasive species and get that managed, because invasive species mean like it has a really bad ecological impact, and we don't want that to spread anymore in our nature. And so even before sowing native plants, like if you don't have extra energy or money to put in that, please just make sure to remove the invasive species. And there's a ton of apps that can help you identify them. And there's a lot of information how to manage them online. Then after you've removed all your invasive species and you still have time and energy, then look at your conditions. And then, as I've said, say, oh, how much sun, how dry is it? Do I have sand? Do I have clay? You know, is there a tree there? How tall can they become? And then you look at all those conditions, and then you choose the right plants for those conditions. I think like, you know, like I grew up as a regular, like a gardener, you know, I did a lot of vegetable gardening for a long time. Then I switched to plants. And I think like in like, the common way we look at gardening is, I want to fit this plant in. So therefore I need to put peat moss, I need to water it, I need to put fertilizer, I need to put pesticides, and you're trying to squeeze in a plant that does not necessarily belong in your garden. And so what we are asking ourselves when we're gardening with native plants is, what kind of conditions do I have and what plants will thrive in this? So it's a bit of a reverse, whereas we don't try to make the plant fit in our environment, we try to look at our environment and then decide what's going to thrive in there. A good thing is, a good practice is also to have a variety of sizes and colors. Because there's different types of bees, there's different types of butterflies, there's hummingbirds, you know, so when you have a variety of sizes and colors, that means you can feed, you know, different species that like different things. And a good practice is also to make sure that you have something that blooms in the summer, something that blooms in the spring, and something that blooms in the fall. So you can make maybe like a salad table or just a regular table, and then make sure you have covered all your bases with the different plants that you have. Maybe to also like plant a minimum of 3 to 5 plants of the same species. Like when you have chunks of things, it's easier for the bees, because bees will just go and like feed off the same species and then feed off another species. So they kind of like go one species at a time. So you want to make sure that there's enough to sustain them. And also from an aesthetics perspective, like if you have clumps of things instead of a mishmash of things, like it kind of looks better. And so plant a minimum, like a 3 to 5 is really a minimum. Like I would say in my yard, I go at least for like 12-ish, a dozen at least. And so you make sure that you can sustain, you know, the plants, the species that feed off of them. A good practice is also to leave bare soil. We have a lot of like ground nesting bees. They're solitary bees. And so they were gonna use maybe like a little bit of a canal that's been left, or especially if your bare soil is facing the south end of your property or southwest, that's a really good spot. And you can add also logs and rocks. Logs will attract like insects. And that can, you know, also attract like woodpeckers, for example, or even the little like canals that's going to be in there can be used by bees. And rocks also can also provide some type of habitat. I learned also that, you know, features like these also help like bees orient themselves in your garden. And so once you put them in there, it's best to leave them. Don't do like me, like I did in the beginning. Oh, I don't like it here. Now I feel like, oh my God, I've confused many bees. So don't do that. And also like no spring or fall cleanup if you want. Like a practice that we were raised to do is, you know, oh, fall is coming, I shouldn't be lazy, I should clean up everything. Like, no, leave the leaves, don't need to cut back. Like everything you see is habitat for something. So the leaves that I leave, I have a maple tree and I leave the leaves, and those leaves are used by like I don't know, like different beetles to hide, or like even like some birds will pick up the twigs that are left on the ground, and leaves to make a nest for their little babies. And so for us, like we see this as litter, but for them it's like a treasure that they need. And so I encourage you not to clean at all. And you'll see like some stuff on Facebook that says, oh, don't clean, you know, until it's like 10 or 15 Celsius. Like, no, if you can, never clean, because the life cycle of a bee is like over can be over a year. And so, and different bees come out at different times in the summer and spring. And so you just want to make sure like you don't disturb them, or you don't disturb anything as much as you can. And so no questions still?
No, I think you're good.
Every time I've thought of a question, you've answered it.
Oh, okay, that's good.
It's good.
It's like around the same wavelength. And so, so where and when can I get free native plants or seeds? And so the way we follow the seed library's activities, follow the life cycle of plants. And so starting in the spring until like the end of summer, like we exchange plants. And then once the flowers have all bloomed and, you know, we can harvest the seeds, then we start the seed exchange season. So right now we have a plant exchange event on July 17th. And if there's an interest for that, we might hold another one later in the summer. We also have on our website an individual plant exchange. So we have just a regular like Google document where people just put their extra plants that they want to donate. And Marion also like is offering free plants there. And so and it's a great way to meet people, and you know, you can ask to visit people's gardens, and typically people are super proud of their gardens, and it's a great way to meet people like in a safe environment, because it's like one-on-one. So in COVID times it's outside, so you're good. And then in the fall we're going to start donating free seeds across the city. And so one of the questions that I have, because you know, typically like the sowing seeds in the more traditional way is done starting in January until like May-ish, you know, typically. And so for us, like, why are we holding our events in the fall? Because a lot of the native species that we have require what we call cold moist stratification. So cold moist stratification is almost like springtime, where, you know, the seed will go through like a freeze and thaw period. And that's done intentionally by the seeds because, you know, we have pretty harsh winters. And so they have like a protective shell around them. And so that protective shell can only be broken through that freeze and thaw cycle. So then the seed can germinate. And so for the species that require cold moist stratification, if you go ahead and plant it in May, you're not going to get germination that year. If you're lucky, maybe the seed is going to continue, hibernating in its little shell, and maybe after the winter it's going to sprout. But if you want to make it happen that year, you got to go through cold moist stratification first. And so there's different ways that you can sow seeds in the fall. If you've never sown seeds, I think the easiest way, and that's the way I encourage people to start, is just to take a pot, put some regular potting mix in it, and then sow your seeds on top, leave them outside, either not southeast or north facing. And then I typically put a screen on top of it that helps the seeds, prevents the seeds from flying away and being eaten. And then I wait until spring until everything sprouts. And in the springtime, you might want to check on them to make sure that they are consistently kept moist, because it's called moist stratification. But I think that's the easiest way to go for beginners. There's also different other ways that you can do it, like using a fridge freezer kind of method, or maybe you can also do like mini greenhouses by using recycled juice containers and so forth. But those methods are a little bit more complicated. So because there's different ways to, the different species have different requirements. And, if you're a beginner, it's a bit overwhelming if you, take like 20 different kinds of species and try to figure out the needs of it, like each one of them. And so what I tell people is like, throw them outside, wait in the springtime, and then sow them at that, plant them at that time. And if you can, like, we really recommend to start seeds in pots, not to do direct sowing. Direct sowing should just be used if you have like a large piece of land, and there's a few species that are fine being directly sown in the soil, but it's not the best way to do it. Like, we want you to have success, and the most successful way to do it is really to start in a pot or in a container. Because like if seeds are sown in the soil, there's more predators. Like some of the soil is not like the most optimal for the seeds to germinate. Like I have heavy clay here. It's pretty hard to start stuff from seeds in heavy clay. And so that's kind of what we recommend doing. So if you want to get more information, as I've said before, there's many ways to reach, well, us, but mostly me, because I'm the one that answers the questions. And so these are all the ways you can reach me. I want to say that our most successful way of learning about native plants more is really through our Facebook group. We have a pretty good community. And if you're looking for specific native plants, we encourage you to post your request on the group's wall. And typically people will offer you like the plant that you're looking for. Like, it's pretty rare that the person doesn't find the plant that he or she is looking for. We also have like a website where we have all of our sowing information, and the catalog is there. And we have information on the website on how to make your own seed envelopes, for example, and how to contribute, and some good design plans if you're thinking about creating your own garden. And so these are all the ways that you can reach us. I think that's it for my presentation. Yeah. So I want to open the floor and see if you have any questions for me. And if that's okay, I'm going to try to stop sharing so I can see your face.